Hey guys, welcome to A Film Darkly. I'm your host, Anthony Paceno. It's been a while since I put up an audio or a podcast. Um, just been really busy with a lot of stuff. Trying to get together a short film right now and doing some videos for my job. I had some big opportunities come up and got sent to Seattle for 5 days and yeah, so just a lot going on. And then with the holidays happening and some birthday parties I had to attend, it's just been a rough time. I mean, not that I'm like, not rough as in it's bad. I just mean like it's just a lot of stuff's been going on. And I've had to do a lot of overtime at work and stuff, working Saturdays and coming in early and things like that. So it's fourth quarter. It's the time for all that sort of stuff. Kind of winding up for the end of the year. It's just the way it goes down. But over this time frame, I've been watching movies here and there, and been keeping up with TV shows and and doing other things. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about some of that stuff. A while back I said I wanted to start doing putting out a episode every Wednesday, and I thought I was going to do that. I thought I was going to stick with Creepshow episodes, and then Creepshow just kind of ended out of nowhere after about 6 episodes, and I just decided I didn't really want to talk about it too much because while I enjoy this show, it's not necessarily something where I'm like feel the need to have to talk about it or anything. I think one of the last episode was kind of weak. They've had hit and misses, definitely, and the show's decent, but we're gonna see if it comes back for a season 2. I have the feeling it might not. Obviously, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I have been watching Mandalorian and keeping up with it. But I kind of want to do. I'll probably do episodes based on Mandalorian. If not one episode talking about the whole season, I might just do maybe I'll go ahead and do a podcast each for each episode. I might as well. I mean, I have something to say about all of them. I will say that I enjoy Mandalorian quite a bit. I do think it's kind of hilarious the amount of people that are in love with Mandalorian right now, and just are like, finally you get it, you get what Star Wars is supposed to be. I mean, somebody on Facebook actually posted, I like Star Wars again, and and I think it's hilarious because it's like the same people behind Mandalorian are the same people that were behind The Last Jedi, the movie that killed these fandom, the fandom, quote unquote. I don't know. I just laugh at it because it's like Last Jedi made tons of money, had lots of repeat viewings. There are lots of people who love The Last Jedi. You just kind of have this like loud, small portion of people that dislike it. And most of the reasons they say they dislike it, just aren't good reasons. And I think I talked about this in the podcast I did for The Last Jedi, because it just really annoys me how much people dislike it, and you hear their reasons for disliking it. It's stuff like Luke wouldn't do that, and it's like, who are you to say what Luke would do based on I get it, you're trying to base it on the continuity and the consistency of the character, but it's like that character has always been wishy-washy. He's been that way forever. The Mary Sue argument, I never understand that argument because she displays the same amount of power Luke did. I mean, Luke learned the Force in like a day, and Rey learned it in a day. But there's also like this whole storyline about the Force Awakens, and a lot of people seem to ignore that part of it, and it's like, no, you can't ignore that. Like you gotta put that in there. Part of the reason she is as powerful as she is because the Force is awakening her, and we don't know why, and maybe we're gonna get reasons in the next film. I mean, I'm kind of interested in how they're inserting the Emperor and all this. I think a lot of people are kind of like, they're just doing it because they're desperate, whatever. No, I think they may have been planning this for a long time. We just didn't know they were. and there's an alarm sounding. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but anyways, um, and it just may be one of those things where it's like we had no idea that was happening, and now it's happening, and we're all stunned by it, and we all have our beliefs about it. But in reality, it's like they probably always planned that. I know they always had Ray's storyline planned out from pretty much the get go. I mean, uh, I believe Daisy Ridley actually confirmed that she always knew she didn't have parents. Yeah, she always knew that. And some people were just kind of like, oh, Ryan Johnson just stepped in and changed it all. And it's like, not really. He had freedom to write certain things. And I personally feel he wrote a very philosophical Star Wars, which is a lot of the reason why I like The Last Jedi quite a bit. But whatever. I know. People can dislike movies. I have no problem with you disliking a movie. I just have a problem when you go overboard and you bash a movie, and you bash it for reasons that are really just the movie didn't fit your nostalgia. The movie just didn't do what you wanted it to do. And it's like, when does it have to do what you want it to do? It's just, is it a good story, and does it add something to the character's story arc? Because based on what everyone wanted, like from Luke, it wouldn't have added to his story arc. Based on what everyone wanted from Rey, it wouldn't have added anything. It would have just kind of made her another Skywalker. That's kind of what people were hoping for. Or it would have made her a Kenobi, and it's just kind of like, who cares, Like there's an extent to where, like, it just kind of is boring. And in fact, that's why people complain about Force Awakens, and then The Last Jedi does something different, and then they all complain about that. So it's so funny to me. It's just this fandom. It's like, I just don't understand it. Henry Cavill came out and was asked about, like, what does he think of fandom, to being toxic, and I've been one of those people who have referred to some of this fandom because the hate for Lost Jedi being very toxic, toxic fanboys. And he was like, he doesn't think there's anything such a thing as toxic, just passion. And I hate to say it, but I hate to say it because I kind of admitting, I have to admit to being wrong, but he's right. It is passion, and these guys do have just a passion for their opinion about The Last Jedi. I may not agree with it, but that is passion, and I will debate them on it still because I still think that they're being unreasonable. But I get that they have a passion for the movie, and they want the movies to just fit a certain narrative, But it was interesting because I had gotten into another little debate on Facebook about it, and like the person I debated basically repeated the same arguments I've heard 1,000 times over. So I didn't feel like I was convinced in any way. It's just sort of like, this is kind of the same bit. It's just people kind of feeling like there's a disconnect. And then some of these people are readers of the extended universe and the expanded universe, and they just can't get over the fact that, like, these movies aren't doing that. And I'm fine with it because I never read the expanded universe, nor did I care about it. I always thought it was a little too muddled. And I think it's better just to stick to the movies because that was the original format that they were presented to us in. That's their medium is film. So it's like, to me, that's what I consider like canon, and if you do anything live action, I'll consider that canon. Even the Clone Wars cartoon, I don't watch it because I honestly never really felt like it was canon, even though it is. Rebels is canon, Star Wars Rebels, but I don't watch it because to me it like don't feel canon. It's okay, it's like I watch episodes here and there, but I can never get sucked into those shows at all. Those shows never suck me in. I'm always just kind of like, okay, I don't care. For me, it's all about the films, and that's it. I just follow the movies. So anyways, let's go ahead and move on. So I do have a lot to say about Mandalorian. I enjoy Mandalorian quite a bit. I love it. Again, I'm not one of these people that hated The Last Jedi. I love The Last Jedi. So for me, it's like, I don't feel like Star Wars has been saved for me. I feel like Star Wars is remaining consistent. I'm loving what Disney has done with Star Wars. So, it revitalized it for me, especially after the prequels. I got somebody actually that was like, you basically just fall for anything they put out there, and it's like, you obviously don't know me, and it's like they're insulting me and such. And then when I call them out on it, it's like I'm the one who has an issue. But I just thought it was interesting that they would even say that, because it's like, I didn't like the prequels. I admit every prequel I saw, I walked out of the theater and was like, that was great. But I also admit that, like, I rewatched them and then I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? Everyone thought episode 1 was fantastic. It got like an A. Most critics were like, it's an A. It's like the greatest Star Wars ever. And then they all thought about it and they're like, this movie really isn't that good. It's kind of like, the prequel Star Warses were just really cheesy. They had mostly they suffered from dialogue. Their stories weren't that bad. They just suffered from dialogue. That was the worst thing about them. But, they weren't the worst things ever. I think one of the things I like about the new movies, though, is just the fact that they seem to be taking the best of both worlds. I admit the older movies are better. Of course, the originals are the best. But there's something that they're managing to kind of take from the originals and combine it with some of the elements of the new the prequels that actually worked. And I think that's what I like so much about these movies. Why I enjoyed Force Awakens so much, and why I enjoyed The Last Jedi as much as I did, and even Rogue One, which hilariously these guys all say, oh, Rogue One's fantastic. It's like, Rogue One's made by the same people. It's like, it doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. Anyways, so let's go ahead and move on from Star Wars. I wanted to talk about and mostly give my review for Dr. Sleep. I got the chance to check this out. I checked it out while I was in Seattle. There was their AMC theaters, of course, is over there. Not where I'm at here, for whatever stupid reason. But I love AMC theaters. So I had to go when I was in Seattle. So I went ahead and visited this huge mall. I can't remember the name of the mall. But I went to this huge mall, Westfield. It was like Westfield something. And it was this giant mall. Just really, really big. And upstairs, on the third floor, actually, they had an AMC. So I went ahead and looked at the times and saw they had 2 showings for Dr. Sleep. And Dr. Sleep was on its way out of the theater. And I was like, well, I better catch it now. So I went ahead and checked out Dr. Sleep. And I was very surprised with this movie. Very surprised. I did not expect Dr. Sleep to be as good as it was. It was a much better film than I possibly could have imagined. The intensity of it, the storyline, the characters. It was just so good. The way they chose to kind of reshoot and recast the characters from the original Shining, from Stanley Kubrick's Shining. I thought that was really, really interesting. We all know that it's notoriously known Stephen King didn't like. It is Stephen King, right? Yeah, Stephen King. He didn't like Kubrick's version of The Shining. And this movie is meant to be a sequel to The Shining, but it's also meant to follow the book. And the book follows King's original Shining. So it's different. So one of the things that he did was he tried to pay homage to the original book by keeping a lot of the elements from the book, from Dr. Sleep, and really putting them in the movie. So it felt like sort of this quasi sequel to both The Shining, Kubrick Shining, and the book and King's Shining. And in a way, he kind of almost like managed to marry the two, and he sort of rebooted Kubrick's version of The Shining by combining those elements, by hiring an actor that could act like and look like Jack Nicholson, and by hiring an actress that can look and act like, and I can't think of her name right now, Shelley Duvall. And I really enjoyed that. I really liked what he did with this, in that sense. And I need to stop saying he, and I need to look up the director real quick. I should have been more prepared, but I'm not. So who cares? Mike Flanagan. And Mike Flanagan, interestingly enough, if you look at his career, he kind of started out with stuff that I'm not the biggest fan of, but he's like slowly gotten better and better and better, and I really enjoy that about him, especially what he did with Dr. Sleep. Rose the Hat, played by Rebecca Ferguson, was firstly incredibly beautiful, but she was a great character, great villain, very intense, and you really felt the build with her, where you were kind of terrified of her. But this little girl in the film, who I have to apparently don't just have it right here, but I have to like dig up the actress. Should have been right here. She played a character by the name of Abra Stone. That was the little girl, Kylie Curran. And I don't know if Kylie's been in anything else. I could look right here on IMDb to see if she has. But Kylie was great in this movie. She was really, really awesome in this film. She really pulled off the character, that she was, Abra, and just this amazing young girl who possesses this gift and happens to be the strongest at that gift. And Rose the Hat kind of has it too, but she has it by kind of draining other people of their gift. And so Dr. Sleep, the plot is basically there's this group of people who run around and hunt down people that have the shining. And when they find the people that have the shining, they take their power essentially by sucking their souls. And it's really interesting concept, but they're able to live forever by doing it. And they also gain power. And they themselves originally start off as people who also, shine, as we find out Danny Torrance calls it. Other people call it other stuff. I'm trying to remember Rose the Hat. Her character and her crew don't refer to it as shining. They refer to it as something else, and I don't remember what it was. But they had a different name for it. And they basically, would just recognize if somebody... Oh, I think... Was it smoke? They have smoke? It was something like that. And anyways, it was really, really, really interesting, though. And I loved Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance. It was interesting because Danny basically goes down the road as his father and becomes like this alcoholic and somebody who just can't really contain himself. And you kind of see, watch him sort of clean his life. And you're sort of wondering, like, because the story kind of starts out sort of all over the place, where you have this, these people, and you have Rose the Hat leading her people, and you're kind of like, okay, what's going on with these, like, gypsy-looking people who are, like, sucking the soul out of people? And then you have Ewan McGregor, who's Danny Torrance, and Danny's, like, gone down this dark road. And then you get introduced to this girl named Abra. And the movie, like, skips years. Like, it's, like, 15 years later, then 5 years later, and you're like, well, what is going on? And as it starts to just sort of come together, Mike Flanagan just does a great job with bringing it together and formulating a very coherent story. Some people complained about like the ending because they at the end they go back to the Overlook Hotel. which is where The Shining takes place. And I didn't dislike it at all. I actually enjoyed what they did with that. Um, it was one of the things I really liked, and I really just I don't know. I think one of the things I liked too about this movie was how they discussed sort of the spiritual aspects. It's kind of like as connected as Danny is to this spiritual realm, which it seems to be that people who shine, so to speak, are essentially people who have major control over their own soul in a way where they can tap into other souls. So they can create images and stuff in people's minds and do things with people's minds, because it's kind of like you're messing with consciousness. So it's sort of like embodied consciousness, and they have the ability to sort of use their own consciousness to expand and to do other things. And it's not, it's because it's not telekinesis. They can't move stuff. It's all within the mind, but it's clearly more than the mind, because it's spiritual. It's an actual spirit, and there's this whole, sort of theme that goes throughout the movie where they're talking about how, like, kind of like almost refusing the idea of an afterlife, but Danny, it's kind of like, no, people do go on. They, they do show people die, and they expel this soul from their mouth. They exhale, and this soul releases from their bodies, and that's what these people, Rose the Hat and her crew, which I can't remember their names, the name of the crew, but they suck up that soul. And of course, they only want people who shine, people who have that ability, and so it really has this nice discussion about the afterlife. And, I really liked how they did this whole thing where Danny gets the name Dr. Sleep, because he works in a hospice, and he helps these older people kind of ease the pain of their passing by showing them memories, and and giving them, like, talking to them about good times as they die. And it's really interesting. I keep saying that, I know, but it is, and it's so fun. And this movie has so many moments that just excite you and get you out of your seat. And I wanted to see it again. I kept thinking about seeing it again, and I just didn't get the opportunity to. And now I think it's left theaters, so I'll just wait to buy it, because it is a movie I definitely want to own. I will say, as a horror film, it's barely scary. It's not really that scary. It doesn't feel like The Shining felt, what Kubrick did, because that movie for me was a very terrifying film. And I would say it's one of the top three scariest movies I've ever seen. One of the others being Candyman. Candyman always scared the crap out of me. But I don't think this movie carried that over. Even though it used the music, even though it had some of the same thrills, it was because you were coming from the perspective of understanding what these entities were. You didn't see them as scary. They were scary in appearance, like they were monsters, like you kind of, ooh. But you weren't terrified of them because you understood them. You knew, you were coming from behind the veil. And it's a, part of what scares people, part of what makes a horror movie scary is when you don't know what's behind the veil. When you have no idea what's behind the curtain, and it's just scaring you, It's terrifying you because you know nothing about it. It's one of the, and if you want to get even more, like, realistic about that, or more practical about that, you could talk even filming wise, how it's filmed. You can add more veil to it, like the way Jaws is filmed, or An American Werewolf in London, where you never saw the wolf, you never saw the shark. It's the same thing. It's like adding more depth to that veil, where you just don't know what's behind that, but it terrifies you because it's the unknown. And you know, that's an interesting aspect, right? It's kind of like if you watch Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, and then you turn around and you watch, oh man, who made Godzilla King of the Monsters? Godzilla King of the Monsters. Who made that? Who made that? Who made that? Who made that? Michael Dort. I think it's Michael Dougherty. You don't say the GH, but it's Michael Dougherty. He made Godzilla King of the Monsters. I enjoyed Godzilla King of the Monsters. But Godzilla, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla versus Godzilla King of the Monsters, made by Michael Dougherty, is not the same feel. Michael understood the monster battle aspect. And he stuck with that, and he gave us that. And I couldn't believe people who said they didn't see enough of the monsters, because the monsters are like in 50% of the movie. I think I actually started to time it and found like there were scenes where they were like in 20 minutes of the film and stuff, and it's like a 2.5 hour film, so it like comes out to like they had like 50% of the movie's screen time, but whatever. Neither here nor there. The first Godzilla, on the other hand, didn't show the monsters that much, and people kind of complained. Even I was kind of raw about it. But there was something about the original Godzilla that I loved, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was watching a video. There's this YouTuber who I follow, and I really enjoy his videos because he manages to break down movies in a very philosophical, psychological way, similar to what I try and do, but I think he's a deeper thinker than I am. And he took like the aspect or the idea of how horror movies can take monsters and hide them in such a way where they become more terrifying. And he was talking about Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, and he was comparing it to Michael Dougherty's Godzilla. And he was saying Godzilla, Gareth Edwards, was preferable to him. And he said the reason is because you never got, I'm going to say it in my own words, you never got behind the veil. You never lifted the veil. Instead, the monsters stayed monsters. You remained in the perspective of the people, and you traveled around and you saw the monsters from the perspective of the people. So the monsters remained monsters. Whereas in King of the Monsters Godzilla, Michael Dougherty's version, he gave the fans more of what they wanted, which was something that reflected the old Tokyo films. Specifically, the Toho era, of Godzilla films. There's various eras. There's a Hizzy era, and there's this other era, and I always forget that other era, and that's actually the era I'm more familiar with. And essentially, Godzilla became more of a superhero. He was like Superman that lay dormant for the first half of the film, and you waited for Superman to wake up. And then once he woke up and he became Superman, he started to fight the bad guy, and you loved it. And like the last half hour of those movies would be like in the daytime, standing in a giant desert with mountains, throwing rocks at each other and monsters fighting, going into a city, blowing up the city, blah, 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 right? And that's what those movies would be. So they became less of monster movies and became more like fun monster films, like fun monster flicks. It's like, oh, there's a monster in this movie fighting another monster. But you were never scared. You were never scared of Ghidorah, or Ghidra. You were never scared of Godzilla. You were never scared of King Kong. You were never scared of those monsters. But in this movie, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, you were kind of scared. Like there's a side of me that like roots for Godzilla. But I realized that like Godzilla was more meaningful in Gareth Edwards' version than he was in Michael Dougherty's version, because Godzilla didn't just pop up and fight. Godzilla showed up once in a while, and he had aura, he had presence, because he was a monster. And you didn't forget him as a monster. Very similar to the movie Cloverfield. You follow a bunch of kids with a shaky camera. And some people just hate that movie. They don't like it at all. I know critics, for the most part, were kind of divisive on it. But I love that movie. And part of the reason I love that movie is because the Cloverfield monster, who I think has been dubbed Clovey, never, never, ever becomes less of a monster. It's always a monster. You don't know where it came from. You don't know why it's around. You don't know what it's doing. It's always just there. It's deep behind the veil. And you see it. It's scary. It's terrifying. And it becomes personal to the people who are trying to survive this city, this attack that this creature's doing. This creature's not even meaning to attack. He's just sort of like showing up, right? Similar with Godzilla in Gareth Edwards' version. Godzilla and the Mutos never mean to kill people. They're just monsters. They can't help it. They're walking in a city and there's just a bunch of crap in their way, and they're just walking through it because they can. So it's this interesting aspect, though. It's the veil, though. And that's something that The Shining did, but Dr. Sleep didn't have the luxury of doing. It couldn't put the veil because the characters understood their world. So you just couldn't be that scary. The only way to be scary is to produce something that left those characters behind a veil. Rose the Hat could have been that, and was for a smidgen of the movie was that, but quickly that veil was lifted. And unfortunately, it becomes less of a scary movie. It doesn't make it a bad movie. It's just not a horror film per se. I don't want to say 100% not a horror flick. No, it belongs in the horror genre, but it's not scary. It's just not. It's a film that just manages to kind of leave us almost looking at a story, a superhero aspect of The Shining. And to some degree, it's unfortunate. It's missed. Maybe the book is better at it. Maybe. More than likely. But in the end, I still, I just think that I still feel the movie's great. I like it a lot. I'm going to say it's at least at least an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And there were some great scenes in it. But in the end, like, in terms of a horror film, it's just not there at all. It hardly feels like a scary movie. And I can't say it's necessarily a movie that tried to be scary. It just sort of had these scenes that were obviously meant to be scary, but at the same time, like, the movie wasn't, like, trying hard to be scary. It was just telling its story. Mike Flanagan did a great job at just telling a story, and it was a good story. So I don't know. I definitely do miss, though, the idea of, like, the veil, but in the end, like, horror in general is missing the veil ideology right now. Horror in general just doesn't have that, and we're seeing it here and there. It's popping up. It's just not, like, entirely there. It's pretty hidden. And there's people who understand it, but they don't know how to exercise it. It's something I'm trying to learn in my own short films, is trying to find this balance of how can I be scary without showing you too much. And it's a tough thing to do, because when I tried to do that in my film, my short film, Justice for Adam, and I failed miserably. Instead, it just came off as goofy. And everyone was just like, that was stupid. When it was supposed to be this horrific reveal. So unfortunately, like, there's a fine line and there's a way to do it. And I've often thought back to that movie over and over and over again, that short film, and just tried to figure out what I did wrong, where I went wrong. I think if I redid it today, there are major things that would change. Whether or not, though, I would get that done, I don't know. Because I think it's hard to do. I really do. I think it's difficult to do. I mean, when you think of Steven Spielberg, he never intended on Jaws being that way. It just happened. Dumb, blind luck. Granted, it was also film technique. Don't get me wrong. It's Spielberg we're talking about. You know, it's film technique. He didn't have a shark, and he said, well, how can I film it where I still give the impression of the shark? You know, and it worked out. It worked out better than he could have imagined. You know, and then there's directors who have it figured out. Like the Gareth Edwards. You know, you see the way he did with... You see what he did with Godzilla. You see what he did with... I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. If you haven't, I would check it out. Is he did a movie called Monsters. Very interesting film about a comet that lands in... I think it lands somewhere in South America. I think it's South America. It could be Central America. But it lands in one of those areas. I don't remember which. And what happens is it produces these creatures. And so there's all these like bands on going through this area because it's basically just totally fenced off. And it's like a large part of this. I think it is South America because it's like a huge part of this continent, and where people are just not allowed to go. And there's a lot of people there, and I could have swore they're all speaking Spanish. I don't remember, but it's about this. There's this journalist and a traveler who end up stuck together, and they're basically like trying to get across the border. And what happens is their plane tickets get stolen, and so he has to find a way across, and he finds an illegal way where this guy is going to where these people actually are going to drive them across. And it starts with like a boat, and it moves to a car, and all the meanwhile they're trying to avoid these monsters. And you see so very little of those monsters, but when they show up, there's a few moments. It's scary, and it's a great movie. When they chose him for Godzilla, I was really happy because I had seen Monsters and enjoyed Monsters. So, anyways, if you've never seen Monsters, please watch Monsters. You could skip the sequel, Dark Continent. I would just watch the first one by Gareth Edwards. It was like, I think it was technically an indie film. It had a big budget, but it was like an indie film. It was wasn't like, didn't get a huge theatrical release or anything like that. I think I watched it like streaming, but I don't remember how I streamed it. I don't remember if it was like, I think that it was before Netflix, so I got it somehow. I don't remember how. Might have even been VOD. Anyhow, so it's a great film, though. If you haven't seen it, I would watch it. But Doctor Sleep, I enjoyed it, loved it. Kind of want to see it again, and I more likely will, because I really did enjoy that film. There was a lot about it I thought worked. And I think Matt Flanagan just did a great job. And he's continuing to get better and better. I don't remember what his first few movies were, but I remember his first few movies, when I saw his IMDb, were nothing special. I think one of them I even hated. But anyhow, but yeah, so anyways, so those are my thoughts. I will be posting again very, very soon. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Write reviews, rate me, whatever you have to do on wherever you're listening to me, iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker, Stitcher. I don't think I'm on Spotify. No, I'm not on Spotify, and I'm not on SoundCloud. You can find some audios on SoundCloud, but I'm not on SoundCloud. So anyways, just look for me in the bigger places. iTunes and Google Play are probably the most popular, so just look for me there. Anyways, talk to you guys next time.